So when I was barely 20 years old, I was traveling with a small group of people through China, and we were spending about 2 months in Qinghai province, which used to be part of Tibet. Our destinations was a specific town to teach English, but we'd been stopping often in towns and small cities along the way. One day we arrived in a rural town, very small, nothing unusual. We spent only a couple of days there, shopping for food at the markets and walking around to see the sights, although there weren't many. This was in the dead of winter, in February, and all the grass on the hills and plains around the town was dead and brown. The overall feeling was that of the normal kind of bleakness that any rural place has in the winter. At this time in my life, things were going amazingly, extraordinarily well for me, and I say that because my teenagehood had been rather darkly overcast. But the overwhelming good luck of being able to travel and these close friends I'd made in the last year had more than changed my feelings and attitude towards life. It was like I was a whole new person. I was ecstatic to be in Tibet, went to sleep with a smile on my face every night. On our second day staying in this small town, I woke up feeling a little odd. Not bad, just odd, like my normal thoughts and feelings had been turned down low, like on a dial. We all decided to go for a walk on the hills right behind the town, where there was a small summit with a pile of rocks and some prayer flags. To be honest, there were little altars, like these on every other hill, but it gave us something to do. As we hiked up the hills behind the town, I started feeling stranger and stranger. I wasn't scared and I didn't feel angry or any strong emotion. In fact, it was like emotion was trickling out of me somehow, and I was getting blanker and blanker, emptier and emptier. My mind started feeling a little hazy, and more I felt like I simply didn't care about anything. A small and rapidly dwindling part of myself started to panic, knew that something bad was happening, but it was like my own inner voice was slowly getting quieter and quieter. I remember we reached a little summit, and I simply sank to the ground next to the pile of rocks. Without meaning to, I started tuning out the voices around me and fixed all my attention on the little pebbles in the dirt. I began tapping one against the other repeatedly. Do you know the kind of horror that is opposite of feeling scared or feeling anything at all? The kind of vacuous hideousness of a fly buzzing against a closed window for hours on end in an empty room? That's what was filling my mind. It was demonic in its meaninglessness. I touched my face and felt that I was grinning at nothing. Through all the emptiness, a thought floated to the forefront of my mind. You should just die. At first it sounded totally reasonable, but something in me fought it, and I was momentarily troubled. Right then, my group started to walk down from the hill, and I followed. The further we walked, the more normal I felt, until we left the town that afternoon, and I was totally freaked out when another girl, Hannah, mentioned in an odd, offhand way that she had felt very strange and depressed while staying there. I told her that I'd felt the same. When the group leader mentioned that a local had told him that the town had been plagued with a rash of young women under 25 committing suicide, Hannah and I went white. I lived in a house from hell for 4 years, from age 11 to almost 16. There was constantly something happening. Doors flying open and shut, voices, footsteps. Nothing ever stayed where you put it. I was alone there a lot because both my parents worked, and I was constantly terrified. One of the most gut-level disturbing things, though, was the little girl in my bathroom. Every time I walked past my bathroom door, which was constantly since it was right outside my bedroom, I saw a little girl with blonde curled hair and a rose-colored dress. She just stood there, staring, looking like a photograph from 1905. I started keeping the door closed so I could walk by without seeing her, but she was always there when I opened it. Once I stepped in past her, I couldn't see her anymore, but I could feel her there. She scared me, but I felt really sorry for her because she was trapped there, just like me, but probably forever. As the years went by and things in the house continued to get worse, she started seeming darker. I started feeling like she wasn't really a little girl. I knew there was something ugly in the house, and I felt like it was presenting this sympathetic image to me. Then I started thinking I was completely losing my mind. One day, when I was 14, I had a friend from out of town come stay with me for a week. I hadn't told her anything whatsoever about the house, because I didn't think she would come if I did. Right after she got there, we were sitting in my room, and she left to go to the bathroom. About a minute later, she walked back in with a puzzled look on her face and said, "So, there's a little girl in your bathroom." Yes, she hangs out in there. Blonde hair, curls, pink dress. Yeah, you know that's not really a little girl, don't you? I almost threw up. I was so relieved and terrified and excited and ready to run out of the house screaming. She wouldn't use my bathroom the rest of the week, and I started using it as little as possible without pissing off my parents, who did not want to believe. Eventually we moved out, and I could not have been happier. I distanced myself from it mentally as much as I could. Then, when I was 18, I took another friend on a road trip to pack up a few things I'd left in the house. My parents hadn't managed to sell it, and wouldn't for 5 more years. The minute we got on the property, my friend seemed uncomfortable. When we came around the bend in the long, steep driveway, he went completely white. I could tell something was wrong, but he insisted he was okay, so we got to work. After a while, he asked to use the bathroom, and I directed him to mine. Not 20 seconds after he left, he came running back in, gasping for breath, and then slammed the bedroom door behind him. He started babbling about a little blonde girl, who isn't really a little girl. All of a sudden, he went dead still, looked me in the eye, and very solemnly said, "She's not happy with you. You left, and you weren't supposed to." We threw whatever we could grab in 2 trips in my car, after I walked him to another bathroom and waited outside the door, and got the fuck out at top speed. Okay, so this was when I used to live in a different state. I got a job working as a cocktail server at a strip club, which was a good choice for me at the time as the club was very fun, kind of metal punk vibe, and also very popular with lesbians. And since I was going through the process of coming out as bisexual and was in a very radical, fuck corporate society, fuck men, let's take their money phase. I'm not one of those people who think stripping is super empowering, but it was a good fit at the time. Also, while I was there after about 6 weeks, I would often have terrible, suffocating feelings, almost about to have panic attacks, and terrible migraines while working in the club. I would often feel panicked and scarred, but I chalked it up to a stressful job in a strange environment. I never had these feelings anywhere else around this time. So the club was really kind of messy, not dirty, but just filled with things, lots of tables in the bar, lots of speakers and extra crap in the back storage room behind the stage, and a tiny crowded dressing room for the dancers. Behind the stage, there was kind of a storage room area that had several dressers and mirrors put in, as well as an old comfy couch in case the dancers wanted to use it as an extra dressing room, or a place to nap, but no one ever actually used it. This room gave me the worst suffocating, panic-inducing vibes of all, and I had no explanation for it. So I would often be at work until 4 a.m. or later. Since I didn't have a car, public transportation wasn't running, and it was in kind of a sketchy neighborhood, I would wait until one of the dancers was done for the night, and she would drop me off at home. This was often after my own shift ended. When I first started working, I would spend the extra time trying to do side work, clean and straighten up like a good employee. But after a while, I would often just hang out in the back room studying, since I was also in grad school at the time. Until when I started completely freaking out in the back room, and when I would leave to go sit up at the bar or in the dancer's dressing room, the feeling would mostly go away. So also when this stuff started to get worse, I have to add that some of it was around Halloween, so I was watching a lot of scary movies. And I was also smoking a ton of weed, so both of these things might have had some effect on my psyche. But also these feelings never happened anywhere else around this time. I started to kind of bring it up to the dancer that drove me home. She said the back room also creeped her out, but didn't go into any detail. So one night, after closing, I was carrying a box of extra glasses into the back room, and I heard the most terrifying sound of my life. It was like from a horror film, like a long screech, almost like electronic music, but just one tone, almost like a chainsaw that reverberated around the entire floor and walls. I dropped the box, screamed, and ran out to the floor. The bartender said he had heard a noise as well, but not as loud as me and without the vibrating floor walls, and started checking the sound system, telling me some of the music equipment had probably just started fucking up. This happened at least 5 more times while I worked there. Sometimes other people heard it, sometimes just me, always when I was walking into the back room. Twice when I walked into the back room, the light would flicker off and would be replaced with a red glow, like someone had put in a red light bulb. Both times that happened, I ran out, got the bartender, they would check, and the light would be totally dead, not working. After a while, I was constantly shaken and didn't want to tell him every time something happened since I was afraid they would think I was crazy after the noise and red light. I would never go to the back room, even when I should have been cleaning it. One time I was standing in the hall between the dancer's room and the back room, half-heartedly sweeping the floor and staring into the back room. I was starting to feel the panic in my chest, and I kept telling myself to look away and look into the dressing room, but I couldn't stop staring, like I was transfixed, and in the corner of my eye I saw a reflection in the mirror set up leaning against the dresser in the back room. I forced my head to look, and I saw, in the mirror, 2 legs in black ripped tights, floating about a foot from the floor, swaying back and forth. I threw the broom, screamed as loud as I could, and ran to the bar. I was convinced one of the dancers had hung herself in that room. I could see it so clearly in my mind. Of course, when we went back, nothing was there. One of the dancers was convinced that the room was haunted, and I was seeing a ghost. She thought maybe someone had killed herself back there. She wanted to get me and some of her friends to do a Ouija board about the bar and the ghost, but I was too terrified. Around all this happening, I felt I was losing my mind. I was having panic attacks, migraines, sleeping with my lights on, was terrified of my shadow, and carried pepper spray everywhere I went. It may have just been a combination of everything in my life, sleeping weird hours, grad school, dealing with my own personal shit, but I've always been a high-stress person who's worked a lot more stressful jobs since then, and I have never experienced anything like that ever in my life. About a week after I saw the legs in the mirror, I was working one more shift before taking a week off to do some research for a grad class and go on a long weekend trip with my girlfriend. This was near Halloween, so the club had kind of gone all out and had goofy decorations and costumes. I usually dressed in all black anyway, and I tried not to wear anything too sexy or distracting, so costumers would mostly leave me alone and concentrate on the dancers. So this day I just wore a black skirt and t-shirt, but had my face painted like a Dia de los Muertes sugar skull. It was mostly white with jewels, and it was fucking rad. Since I was so freaked out all the time at the club, I started asking if I could leave around midnight and would catch the last bus. But this night my friends were meeting me to drink at the club after my shift. I was near the end of my shift and was taking off my apron in the dressing room and leaned over the dancer's mirror to check my makeup. And that is the last thing I remember until I was being shaken awake by one of the bouncers with a friend and my girlfriend by my side. I was in the haunted back room laying on the couch, and my face paint was completely smeared all over my face. They said I had disappeared for about 45 minutes until they went looking for me and found me asleep and had been trying to shake me awake for almost 2 minutes. I was completely hysterical, had no idea what had happened. My clothes weren't disturbed. My tip money was still in my apron, and there's almost no way anyone had been back there all night. I was almost afraid I had been drugged, but right after this event I went to the doctor. No health insurance, so this was a big deal to me, and got checked out and had them give me an MRI since. I was afraid I had a brain tumor or something that made me lose my mind. They suggested I speak to a psychologist. After that night, I had to quit the job and never went back. Besides those horrible events, I loved working there and made a lot of friends, but I absolutely lost my mind. And once I left, I never felt any of those feelings or saw anything like that ever again. In my old apartment, my dog would, on occasion, look down the hallway towards a bedroom from the living room and growl for no apparent reason. Also on occasion, when I was sleeping in the bedroom, she slept at the foot of the bed, I would wake up with her staring intently at the door and growling. She was a big girl, 140 pounds of Great Dane, Catahoula, and slobber. So I'm there for a couple of years of this, thinking, okay, my dog has a good imagination. Wrong. One night, I woke up due not to my dog growling, but barking for all she was worth. And not at the door, she was barking straight at me. I opened my eyes pretty much immediately, and there was a blur of light, leaning over me, very close, certainly less than 6 inches from my face. It was not distinguishable as a person. It more resembled a person-sized version of a colorful nebula you might see a picture of in a science magazine. 3-dimensional and all. I immediately got the distinct impression that this thing had been watching me sleep, for God knows how long and how. Many times before, for all the clarity of that distinct feeling, I had no sense of what it wanted, whether it was malevolent or just curious. I flipped right the fuck out, jumped backwards to the other side of the bed, too terrified to scream, and that blur of light receded and disappeared over the course of about 3 seconds. My dog was going absolutely ape. So, shortly thereafter, I asked the building manager if anybody had ever died there. She investigated that and came back to me a couple of weeks later with a yes. A woman had died of a drug overdose in that apartment in 1995, so 12 years earlier, shortly after having her child removed from her custody because of her addiction problems. My dog did still growl at the hallway from time to time, but I never saw it again. I moved out about a year later. I've had other encounters, but this thing was literally inches from my face, watching me sleep. Getting shivers now just writing about it. So when I was a kid, I would race up to the top of the stairs as fast as I could, like it was some sort of silly game. Well, I must have been 5 or 6 at the time. I'm not sure, but I know I was very little. Somewhere along the way, a voice at the top of the stairs started to whisper to me. It would make bets with me, such as, "I bet you a penny you can't make it to the top of the stairs." I don't really think there was a certain amount of time or anything. As I said, I was very little, so I probably didn't have any counting abilities anyway. I recall just sitting at the top of the stairs, having conversations with this voice, about the betting, of course. Tongue sticking out, eventually the voice. It was like a whisper of a man's voice, not my own voice in my head. Started to bet me my life. Instead of pennies, it'd say, "I bet you your life you can't make it up the stairs, blah blah." As I got older, it stopped. I never really thought about it at all. I never mentioned it to anyone until one night I was sleeping over at my brother's place. I was about 18, he was 22, and we were talking about spooky stories. Out of nowhere, I brought up the voice at the top of the stairs, and my brother got all quiet and weird. Before I even mentioned the betting aspect, he said, "Did it make bets with you?" We both looked at each other, horrified. It certainly was freaky after the fact. Sure, a lot of bad shit went down in my family at that period of time in my life, and my mother, a heavily religious lady, said there was a lot of evil in our lives at that time. I don't at all think our place was haunted, BTW. It was built in the late 70s, and as I got older, I never experienced anything like that again.